1971 and 1972, the nation's capital was gripped by fear. A ruthless predator was stalking the streets of Washington, D.C., abducting young black girls in broad daylight, only to dump their bodies along the I-295 corridor. The press would dub him the Freeway Phantom, a name that still chills those who remember the case. But over 50 years later, not a single arrest has been made. Who was this phantom? Why did the killing stop? And why do so few people even remember these girls' names? This is the story of the Freeway Phantom. In the early 1970s, Washington, D.C. was a city of contradictions. Just a few miles from the White House, where lawmakers spoke of justice and equality, lay neighborhoods where broken promises echoed louder than any speech. In Southeast D.C., a largely black working-class community fought every day for dignity, safety, and recognition. The streets were cracked, schools were overcrowded, grocery stores were scarce, and in many areas, the only thing more common than poverty was silence. At the time, the city was nearly 70% black, but the systems in place, policing, media coverage, city services, still reflected something else. If a white child from Georgetown went missing, it was front-page news. But in neighborhoods east of the Anacostia River, black families learned to whisper their grief, because the world rarely listened. That's the environment the Freeway Phantom emerged into. A predator was stalking black girls in their own neighborhoods, near their own homes, and dumping their bodies like trash just outside the city limits. And somehow, no one saw him. Or maybe they did, but no one did anything. This is not just a story about a serial killer. This is a story about who gets justice and who gets forgotten. 13-year-old Carol Denise Spinx was one of 7 children being raised by a hard-working single mother in Southeast D.C.'s Southeast 22nd Street. She was in 7th grade and considered shy but sweet. Carol loved playing jacks with her sisters and had a gentle, soft-spoken demeanor. On April 25, 1971, Carol left her family's apartment to buy groceries at a nearby 7-Eleven. Her mother had told her not to go out, but Carol's older sister convinced her to make the short walk to a 7-Eleven. She never came back. 6 days later, her body was found on a grassy embankment along I-295. She was found wearing only underwear and a blouse. Most of her clothing was neatly folded beside her body, including her shoes, suggesting the killer took time, possibly as a signature or form of ritualistic detachment. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Semen and unknown pubic hairs were recovered. There were clear marks around the neck, consistent with manual or ligature strangulation. Some sources report possible wrist abrasions, suggesting her hands may have been tied. It is believed the killer had kept her alive for several days. An autopsy revealed the presence of partially digested food in her stomach that she hadn't eaten before leaving home, indicating the killer fed her while holding her captive. Her death devastated the Spinx household. Carol was considered the baby of the family, and her mother would later say she never fully recovered. Just 2 months later, the killer would strike again. 16-year-old Darlenia Denise Johnson was full of promise. A high school sophomore at Ballou High School, she was outgoing, responsible, and had dreams of becoming a nurse. She worked at Oxon Hill Recreation Center during the summer to save money for school clothes. She lived just 5 blocks from where Carol Spinx had lived and where she, too, would be taken. Her abduction was so eerily similar that residents began fearing a serial predator. Her mother described her as someone who always called home if she was going to be late, so on July 8, 1971, when Darlenia didn't return home from work, her mother knew something was wrong. Her family said she had been excited for a neighborhood party the following week and was planning to do her hair that day. Darlenia was last seen heading to her job. She never made it home. Nearly 11 days later, her partially decomposed body was found 15 feet from where Carol Spinx had been dumped. Some articles of her clothing were removed and placed nearby, though not as neatly as in Spinx's case, possibly due to body decomposition or animal activity. She, too, had been assaulted. Her body was too decomposed for definitive conclusions as to whether any viable DNA was found. Hairs may have also been collected, but sample integrity was likely poor. Her cause of death was presumed to be strangulation. However, since her body was partially decomposed, the lack of soft tissue preservation made it impossible to confirm ligature marks. Like Carol, her autopsy revealed the presence of partially digested food, suggesting she was kept alive for days after the abduction. 2 girls from the same neighborhood found feet from each other and matching MO. This put residents on high alert. Unfortunately, the killer was only beginning. Brenda Fay Crockett was bright-eyed and friendly. She was a 5th grader who loved animals and dreamed of being a teacher. Her home was warm and loving. Her stepfather, Reginald Crockett, worked hard, and her mother kept the household running. She had a close bond with her younger brother and loved watching TV, jumping rope, and pretending to teach her dolls. She was known for being cautious and not talking to strangers, making the events of her abduction especially unsettling. On July 27, 1971, she went out to the store and never returned. But this case was different. Hours after her disappearance, her family received 2 chilling phone calls. The first came from Brenda. She called home and spoke to her 7-year-old sister. She said, "A white man picked me up. I'm in Virginia. I'm coming home soon." Her voice sounded frightened, and she seemed to be reciting something, possibly under duress. Her voice was trembling. Then the line went dead. She then called back and spoke to her stepfather. She asked, "Did my mother see me? Did my mother see me?" Then she hung up. Investigators believe she was coached by the killer to say she had been taken by a white man, possibly to throw off the investigation. The phone call itself was a major anomaly, as no other victims were known to have contacted anyone while in captivity. Her body was found the next day on U.S. Route 50. She had been raped and strangled with a scarf. There was clear ligature evidence around the neck, and semen and pubic hairs were recovered. As before, the autopsy revealed the presence of partially digested food, once again suggesting she was kept alive for days after abduction. Although there is no mention of clothing being folded, she was found partially clothed with her blouse pulled up. Multiple green synthetic fibers were found in her hair and on her clothing. These fibers were not consistent with clothing she owned or had worn that day. Investigators believe they may have come from a carpet or upholstery inside the suspect's vehicle or home. To investigators, this suggests she may have been held in a specific environment, potentially a vehicle or basement. Her phone call to her family added a haunting dimension to the case. Her little sister still remembers picking up the phone and hearing Brenda's trembling voice. She would be the youngest of the Freeway Phantom's known victims. At this point, community leaders and black newspapers began suggesting a pattern. 1 girl was a tragedy, 2 a grim coincidence, but 3 black girls, all under age 17, found assaulted and strangled within 3 months. This wasn't a wave of crime. This was a killer. Public sentiment turned to fear as parents began walking children to school. A Washington Afro-American editorial said, "If these girls lived in Georgetown or Chevy Chase, this would be national news. Instead, we bury them quietly." However, it would take another victim for the police to begin investigating this as a serial case. Henoshia Yates, nicknamed Menya, was 12 years old and in the 7th grade at Sousa Junior High School. Her unusual and beautiful name meant child of peace, and she lived up to it. She was cheerful, polite, and curious about the world. Nenya loved reading and had started writing short poems. Her dream was to become a school teacher or librarian. On October 1st, 1971, she had been sent to Safeway to buy sugar for the family and had promised to return quickly. When she didn't, her mother instantly knew something was wrong. Her body was discovered just hours later along Pennsylvania Avenue. Like the others, she had been assaulted and strangled. Again, DNA and pubic hairs were recovered. She was found partially dressed, her clothing removed, and folded beside the body along with her shoes. Unlike the others, her death was swift. No evidence indicated she had been kept alive. Did the killer panic, or was this a sign of escalation? When Henoshia was found dead, the whispers became headlines. For the first time, D.C. Metropolitan Police and Prince George County authorities began to publicly link the cases. The similarities were now undeniable. Young black girls ages 10 to 16, abducted in D.C., assaulted and strangled, bodies dumped near I-295 or Route 50. Police admitted what the streets already knew. There was a predator in their city. They formed a task force, shared files, interviewed witnesses, but for every door they knocked on, they missed another. It was around this time the term freeway phantom began circulating, coined either by press or internally by police. And while they chased shadows, the phantom was already hunting his next victim. Brenda Denise Woodard was 18 years old in 1971 and lived along Maryland Avenue. Brenda was outgoing and enjoyed spending time at local restaurants with friends after school. She was described as strong-willed, intelligent, and deeply compassionate. She had aspirations of becoming a teacher and often tutored her younger cousins in math and English. On November 15, 1971, Brenda was taking night classes at Cardozo High School, and she and a classmate decided to have dinner at Ben's Chili Bowl after class. They then boarded the bus together for the trip home. Her friend said she exited the bus at 8th and H Street Northeast around 11:30 p.m. and planned to catch a transfer for her trip home. Brenda never made it. Her mother reported her missing immediately. Approximately 6 hours later, in the early morning hours of November 16th, Brenda's body was found just off the Route 202 Baltimore-Washington Parkway exit. She had been stabbed, strangled. However, she was found fully clothed, and she had not been assaulted sexually. No semen or pubic hairs were recovered. Unlike the younger girls, Brenda had likely fought back. This is probably why she was killed so quickly and not assaulted. Investigators did find one chilling clue in Brenda's coat pocket, a note handwritten by the killer. It read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can." It was signed, Freeway Phantom. Investigators noted that Brenda likely wrote it herself under duress, as the handwriting matched hers, indicating the killer possibly dictated it. The vocabulary level was high, suggesting a well-educated suspect, and implies psychological dominance and possible familiarity with law enforcement or criminology. This murder may have yielded another clue. There is an unconfirmed report of a man allegedly seen sitting near Brenda on the bus that night. He was described as calm, heavy-set, with glasses, but police never publicly identified him. This witness was never found, and no composite sketch was released. Personally, I do not believe this man would have been involved, as it seems more likely than not that the Freeway Phantom owned a vehicle and would not be riding the bus. Brenda would be the oldest of the victims. It would be nearly a year later before the Phantom claimed his last known victim. Diane Denise Williams was 17 years old and a senior at Ballou High School in Washington, D.C. She was a strong student with dreams of going to college. She grew up in a large and loving family in Haley Terrace. She was known for her maturity, neatness, and warmth. She babysat neighbors' kids and wrote heartfelt poetry about growing up in D.C. Her family described Diane as someone who always kept her word and was never out late. On September 5, 1972, Diane headed to her boyfriend's house, a boy she had just started dating who worked in the neighborhood. She spent the evening visiting him, and when it was time for her to leave, he walked her to the bus stop, not far from the location where Carol Spinx and Darlenia Johnson were abducted. She was last seen boarding the bus. Diane never made it home that night. Her body was found the next day, again along I-295. She had been strangled, but no signs of sexual assault were confirmed. Like Brenda Woodard, Diane was found fully clothed. There are conflicting reports as to whether any biological DNA was found. There was no mention of binding marks on her arms or legs. Diane's murder marked the end of the known freeway phantom killings, and her sudden loss devastated her mother, who never gave up hope that the case would be solved. 6 victims tied together by evidence that points to the perpetrator or perpetrators. The common MO in each of these crimes is evident and partly atypical. Evidence and behaviors can often point to the type of suspect the killer may be. All victims were placed within a short radius of I-295, Pennsylvania Ave Southeast, or Route 50. All of the victims' bodies were laid gently, not tossed, often face up. Clothing was either neatly folded or still worn, in contrast to typical dump site behavior. The condition and placement of the victim's clothing is one of the most telling behavioral patterns in the freeway phantom murders. This detail reflects the killer's ritual, control, and perhaps a psychological signature. Clear ligature marks were found on the necks and wrists of at least 2 victims. However, no ropes or bindings were found at the scene, implying the killer removed them. This points to a careful and methodical killer who didn't want to leave physical evidence behind. But he did. Unknown pubic hairs were recovered from several bodies. The first 3 victims had biological evidence present. These are now potentially the best chance for identifying the killer through DNA genealogy, if properly preserved. There are possible eyewitnesses in the freeway phantom case. There is one unverified report that a teenage girl escaped a potential abduction attempt that fit the freeway phantom's MO. She told police a man in his 30s offered her a ride and then tried to force her into his vehicle when she declined. She fought him off and ran. The girl described her attacker as African American, wearing dark clothing and driving what she thought was a green or blue compact car. No arrest was made. One girl later told police that she was followed by a green Vega and ran home. Multiple witnesses in Southeast D.C. during the time of the killings reported a green Chevrolet Vega cruising around school zones and bus stops, often driven by black men in their late teens to early 20s. It was the reports of this green Vega that led to the first group of suspects. The Green Vega Gang was a loosely connected group of young African American men operating in the D.C. and Prince George's County area. They were known for abducting and raping black teenage girls, often using a green Chevy Vega, a vehicle similar to the one spotted near multiple abduction sites. In 1974, the FBI interviewed a jailed gang member who claimed others in the gang were responsible for at least one of the freeway phantom murders, specifically Brenda Crockett. He claimed she had been held in a house near Pennsylvania Avenue before being killed. He also described crime scene details not publicly known, such as where the body was dumped and what the victim was wearing. This lead, however, eventually fell apart. The informant failed a polygraph test, and his story changed under pressure. The FBI later called him unreliable. No physical evidence ever tied any gang member to the murders. Still, many investigators believe the gang may have been involved, or knew who was. Another theory, heavily considered by the FBI in the late 1970s, was that the killer may have been a police officer, soldier, or someone with intelligence or military training. They believe the killer may have known patrol routes and dump site blind spots. They point out the killer was able to evade surveillance and dumped bodies in jurisdictional gray zones, making investigating more difficult. Others pointed out that the victims were often cleaned, indicating the killer had an awareness of forensics long before it was common knowledge. The misleading phone call from Brenda Crockett may have suggested confidence and control, as well as psychological manipulation, which may have been obtained while in the military. This theory, too, would go nowhere. Edward Leonard Selman and Tommy Bernard Simmons, two ex-cops, were arrested for the murder of Angela Denise Barnes. Barnes, 14, was at one point thought to be a victim of the serial killings. However, authorities later determined that Barnes was not a victim of the freeway phantom and resumed their investigation on the murders. No concrete suspect was ever identified, no official ever confessed or came under public suspicion, and without DNA or direct evidence, it remained a chilling but unproven theory. Then came Robert Askins. A convicted killer with a mind sharper than most, Askins was a former computer technician, intelligence worker, and convicted killer. He had been arrested in the 1930s and 1950s for poisoning and stabbing women, once telling police he had a deep hatred of women, particularly prostitutes. Incredibly, he had strangled a woman with a scarf, just like the Phantom. Askins was known to use advanced vocabulary similar to the handwritten note found in Brenda Woodard's pocket. He had worked for the National Science Foundation and later the U.S. Government Printing Office, which placed him in D.C. at the time of the killings. He also lived near several victim abduction sites. During their investigation of Askins, investigators executed a full search of his home, seizing typewriters and handwriting samples. He took multiple polygraphs, which were inconclusive. Years later, his DNA was compared to evidence, but results were either inconclusive or samples were degraded. No physical evidence ever directly connected him to the murders, and the FBI closed their investigation into Askins in the 1980s, citing lack of evidence. He died in prison in 2010 at age 91 while serving time for an unrelated murder. Some investigators believed he was the most likely suspect. He is also the suspect named in the book Tantamount, which was written by the father-daughter writing duo Blaine Pardoe and Victoria Hester. The case dragged on. Suspects came and went, but no arrests ever stuck. The freeway phantom didn't leave fingerprints. He left symbols, fibers that didn't match, a message pinned by a terrified hand, a stomach full of food she never bought. This was a killer who took his time and erased his tracks. But in tiny, overlooked places, carpet fibers, pubic hairs, stomach contents, he may have left just enough. In 2021, family members pushed for modern DNA testing to be done on any remaining physical samples, but the results, if tested, have not been made public. There was one clue as to who DC's most notorious serial killer might be. It was tucked away in an FBI report detailing a man connected to a cache of incriminating evidence, but now it has completely vanished. Community organizer Dorothy Wheeler organized a search party for Spinx, the first victim, who was abducted April 25, 1971. Shortly after, Wheeler was targeted too. According to FBI documents, she repeatedly received threatening letters and phone calls from a deep-voiced man who insinuated he was the killer. According to her reports to police, the caller told her, quote, "You have daughters, and if you don't want them raped and dropped on the side of the road, you'll keep your nose out of this." Whoever it was seemed to know the details of her life. She did have daughters, and the calls came to her home number, even though her number was unlisted and had only been installed a week before the incident started. She also received letters without postage at her home and workplace. There was something else unsettling. Wheeler reported receiving these messages in the days before Spinx had been found dead on the roadside, the afternoon of Tuesday, May 1st. Then they stopped. How would her harasser have known to threaten her with the prospect of her daughters being dropped on the side of the road unless he knew precisely where Spinx would end up? These revelations are found in an October 1974 FBI Washington Field Office report, but that report has somehow vanished. But before the report in question went missing, the investigator read its content aloud during a recorded phone call. The recording stands as corroboration that the report existed. The investigator now relies on this digital version of the report, too. As mentioned before, in October 1974, the FBI, looking to pin the phantom murders on 4 incarcerated members of the Green Vega gang, searched the case file for any indication that the gang members' 1972 green Chevy Vega had been anywhere near a phantom crime scene. What they found was a record of a different green car instead. According to this lost FBI report, in November of 1971, there was a late-night crash on the same dark road where Woodard's body would be recovered several hours later. Inside a light green, black-striped 1968 Ford Grand Torino towed from the scene was what appeared to be a blood-stained knife. As you will recall, Brenda Woodard had been stabbed 6 times. As crazy as this sounds, according to an investigative document, the owner of this vehicle was considered a witness rather than a suspect. The document stated that this man should be contacted for additional information. However, it is unclear whether investigators actually spoke with the man. This feels like an extremely promising lead that appears to have slipped through the cracks. More than 50 years have passed since the freeway phantom last struck. The city has changed. The streets are paved anew. But for the families of 6 young black girls, time has not healed. It has only deepened the silence. Their names are etched not into court records or solved case files, but into gravestones and memory. And somewhere, buried in a forgotten evidence box or whispered in an unspoken confession, the truth still waits. Until justice is served, the freeway phantom is not just a killer who vanished into the night. He is a wound the city has never closed. Anyone with information about the freeway phantom murders can contact the Major Case/Cold Case Unit of the Metropolitan Police Department at 202-727-9099.